and that we have to learn to overcome the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony, and not loving our life unto death. If you want to break free of whatever that thing mentally, emotionally, physically, that downtroddenness, that heavy-heartedness, that stress, that depression, any of those factors, that the only way you're going to overcome this part of it is really by the blood of the Lamb, and you recognizing that God's grace is bigger and more powerful than anything that you could even imagine in your circumstance, and by the words of your testimony. And why is that so important? Your testimony, your story, that what God's been doing in your life. Because I promise you this, that the King of Kings, the Lord of Hosts, wants to write a better story in our lives than we ever could. I know from my own past. And I've learned in my journey, and I'm only 33, I'm a pup to many of you, right? I'm only really 10 years old when it comes to my serious walk with Jesus. I'm just a kid. I'm 10, man. I surrendered my life to Jesus 10 years ago on the night of an accident, and when my life was turned upside down, but the grace of God, and but by His mercy and His love. And I've learned that me plus God will always be the majority. We teach that here sometimes, and it's all the time, but I don't always stress it, that whatever your battle is, I don't care what your struggle is. Maybe it's your low self-esteem or your low self-value, or maybe it's your anger issues, or just your lack of trust, or your pessimisticness. I don't know if that's a real word, but I made it up. Pessimisticness, you know what I'm saying. I can do that when I have a microphone. That you're pessimistic, let's say it that way, right? Whatever it is, or maybe you have a besetting sin of an addiction or something that you can't break free of. I need you to fully in your heart begin to get this word, that you plus God is the majority. That I don't care what it is, that you plus God is the majority. And that the testimony of your life, and why the thread of you understanding your story, because that's what the testimony is, it's your story. And Psalms 40 is going to magnify this when we look at it in a little bit, but it's your story. You see, the enemy is invisible, and he can whisper, and he can lie, and he can get you to doubt, and he can get you to struggle with just self-value and worth, and you can look hopeless, and you can look at with your eyes the circumstances and the lay of the land, and you can seem overwhelmed sometimes when the enemy is constantly warring on you, or saying you're not enough, or you know what, there's a problem that can't be solved. The importance of your testimony is that even though the enemy is invisible and he can lie and he can manipulate you and he can get you to maybe to cast doubts, he can't change what God's did in your past. Your story of what God has brought you through, it's yours, and it's only by the glory of God. God owns that redemption. He owns that restoration. He owns that transformation. He owns how you made it through a circumstance that only by the grace of God you got through. And I would say in here, there's about every one of you, and maybe some of you maybe don't have you're not all in the gospel. You're not all in on this, living this lifestyle surrendered to Christ. But I could say there's every one of you that you can look back on your past and say that God's got you through something that you don't see how you got through. That's your testimony. And why it's so important for you to grab that testimony of your life is because the enemy is smart, and he knows how to get ahead of you and try to lay traps and to get you. He's always at work trying to get us to stop pursuing the King. And it's hard sometimes to hear the will of God. Let's be honest. God, is that your voice? What am I supposed to do? But what the enemy can't touch is your past and what you've overcame. And you need to embrace that. How do I know? Well, some of you may not have totally known, and I'm going to share some of my story today, which is kind of a coincidence on this. It's just crazy, all of how this has worked together. The testimony of what God's done. See, many of you may not know that I battled bulimia from 18 to 23 terribly. And some of you may not know that, some of you do, but that from the ages of 13 to 23, I was the biggest drug addict. I was the biggest alcoholic. I was the absolute biggest. My drug addiction led me to needing to always buy more drugs, and I didn't have money, so that led me into stealing. And I battled suicide in high school, where I've had a rope around my throat, and I've battled self-harming in high school. I was a kid that was so angry of my past. When my parents got divorced when I was 13 years old, I ran away from Jesus and grace and God, and I didn't want to hear anything about that. And so for 10 years, I was in the world just trying to find and to fill a void. Because see, we all will have voids if you don't have a relationship with your King. You will worship something. Mine just happened to be drugs and alcohol, and I was picked on, and I was a heavier kid, and I had all of these voids that when I was younger, and I had a relationship at youth group, and I was in church when I was up to 13. I had good people around me, but when my parents got divorced, I ran from God. And I ran from anything of Jesus because I didn't want to hear about it, because if Jesus was so good, why was my parents being divorced? And so I ran away into the world. I ran into the wilderness. And when I got to high school, drugs and alcohol and partying, I was just trying to fill all these hurts. And I wouldn't face them. But when the accident happened in my life at 23, some of you probably kind of know, but at 23, after being kicked out of high school at 18, and I went to the Army from 18 to 19 and a half years old, and I got kicked out of the Army for poor choices, and I was living back in my hometown, and I had stolen $4,000 from my grandpa Harmon, and I was just a young man that was lost and was hurting and was running from God and running from just accepting and taking ownership and really repenting, and just, I was just a mess, right? And then the accident happened at 23. I was in a bad accident, drinking and driving, and my passenger passed away. And at 23 years old, I knew my world was over. I was being charged with reckless homicide. But I'm telling you, God is always in the middle of your story. And the family of Priscilla Owens stepped in without me knowing them. I've ever met them, and they instantly forgave me. It was radical and wild, and it transformed me. And grace became more than a word in the Bible. Grace became tangible, because that family would come and see me, and I would get to hug them, and I've sat down at the table with them, and I've ate meals with them, and they've put a love on me only but by God's grace and mercy. And I've learned that the grace of God isn't just the concept that He's forgiven me. It's the power to transform my life. You know, coming up right now, actually, I am now walking into my 10th year of total sobriety. I'm walking into my 10th year of overcoming eating disorders. I'm walking into my 10th year of overcoming suicidal thoughts, my 10th year of self-harming, my 10th year of drug, alcohol. I mean, I'm walking into all of this, and all that is I'm a 10. When did that all happen? When I let God get into the middle of my life, and I begin to say, you know what, God, I want to pursue you. I want to surrender to you. I don't know what to do, but I do know this, that you plus me will always be the majority against whatever storm and mountain. And I've been home now for 5 years, and God's did a lot in the last 5 years, and I've recognized the power of that verse, how you overcome the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and the words of my testimony. And I don't love my life to death, and I've overcame the enemy because I'm daily trying to stay surrendered to the grace of God and seek His kingdom. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. And I'm just pursuing the things of God, and I've learned that my testimony is a weapon for me, not against me, and it's what God's done for me, and I share it, and I let people know, and I don't hide the grace of God under a bushel. And you could take my life, because you know what, I'm sealed in eternity, man. I'm willing to preach this gospel anywhere, highway, byway, stranger, orphan, widow. You can send me anywhere. I'm all in.